Welcome everyone, my name is Bartik, bringing you another video on Ashes of Creation. Now if you're like me, you have probably listened to at least one of the interviews that Steven Sharif, the creative director of Intrepid Studios, has done with either Summit and Shroud, Asmongold, or Tim the Tapman. I've been trying to nail down specifically what it is that makes me so excited for this project, and why these big streamers and all their chats got so hyped as they listened to Steven talk. Why is it that I am so interested in devouring hundreds of hours of content for a game still in development? Now I've heard a lot of people say, oh, it's too good to be true, or it's too ambitious, and I would agree that it is ambitious, but very few of the systems intended for this project are something we have never seen in a game before. In fact, Intrepid Studios seems to be taking a lot of the systems that made certain games great and merging them into one project. I believe implementing each individual system won't be that difficult by themselves, but it will be difficult making sure that all these aspects combine into an overarching, interdependent system that feels good, that feels realistic. And that, I realize, is what makes me so excited for this game. The fact that many of the aspects, if implemented correctly, will make Vera, the Ashes of Creation world, feel realistic. This game will have realistic systems in a fantasy setting. First, a reminder that this video is part of my theory crafting series. We will be taking a look at confirmed systems in Ashes of Creation, as well as ideals that Steven has mentioned many times. This game is still at the beginning of alpha testing, and much of it, even the confirmed systems, are subject to change. I think part of the reason that Intrepid Studios is having open development like this is because they understand how important the feel of each system is to making an entire interdependent world. It will allow them to get feedback and adjust in-game mechanics and systems until they get that correct and realistic feel to the game. Now, over the course of the rest of this video, we are going to discuss how many of the currently planned systems are all designed to make Vera feel like a cohesive and realistic environment, within a fantasy setting, of course. First, we will take a look at the economic systems of Vera, as this is the driving factor for most MMORPGs. Then, we will take a look at how players actually populate this world and are encouraged to create their own communities and societies. Finally, we will take a look at the political systems that these communities may develop. The first thing to establish for the basis of an economy is the fact that at its most basic form, money, or gold in a fantasy world, is a representation of time and effort. In real life, there are three primary factors that determine the cost of a product. The first is the manufacturing cost, the second is the transportation or shipping cost, and the last is the storage cost. This cost cycle potentially happens multiple times before the consumer buys a final product. For example, if you are buying a metal chair, the first cost cycle starts with mining the metal. In this instance, there is a manufacturing cost to extracting the ore, which then needs to be shipped to the next location where it is stored while waiting to be processed into refined metal. This cycle starts again when the ore is refined, then shipped to the place where it will be stored while waiting to be made into chairs. Now, if you haven't figured it out by now, this cycle starts one more time for the manufacturing of the chair itself and ends with the consumer actually buying it in a store. In many MMOs, this entire cycle gets ruined and items become devalued due to things like fast travel, massive personal inventories, and a global auction house with one-click shopping and instant delivery. In almost every MMO, Ashes of Creation included, there is a manufacturing cost to goods. Someone has to actually spend time gathering the materials and processing them. But this is where a lot of other MMOs stop. In Ashes of Creation, transportation of goods will matter. There will be a lot of goods that are abundant in one area of the map and rare in other areas. With limited inventory sizes, players will have to rely on caravans in order to get their goods from one area to another. These caravans can also be attacked and a portion of those goods stolen. As time is money, this puts a very realistic cost to the transportation of goods, especially the more valuable the contents of the caravan are, as you will have to hire more guards or get more friends to help you defend it. Now, onto the storage aspect of this cost cycle. This is the aspect that we probably have the least amount of information on in Ashes of Creation. To my knowledge, there are 3 primary ways of storing goods, each with differing costs and capacities. The first is your own personal freehold. Freeholds are estates out in the world that are owned by individual players. We will discuss a bit more about freeholds as we get into the community part of this video. The second place to store your goods is in player-purchased houses or apartments within a node. Now for these first 2, you will have to first purchase the building itself and then purchase furniture that allows you to store things, and then there will be taxes and upkeep costs associated with each. This gives a cost to storage of goods. The last method of storage is a centralized warehouse within each node. My current understanding is that there will be taxes associated with having warehouse storage, but we will have to see what the actual cost ends up being. When it costs money to store something, the player is faced with a very realistic decision of whether the items are valuable enough to store or whether to pump the resources back into the economy. A couple other major factors in an economy are services and branding. In Ashes of Creation, you will actually need to go to the location of the good or service you want to purchase. That means if you want your gear repaired or want a sword made, you will need to go to a node that has an appropriate level blacksmith building and a smith to make it for you. Steven has said that he wants to remove any random aspect from crafting, but we have yet to see how the level of the building and the craftsman affect the end quality of the item. This gives the potential for master craftsmen to build a name and brand for themselves. This leads into the community aspect of this video. With a crafting system like this, it will encourage players to network and make connections. Say you go to a blacksmith to get your gear repaired. He is responsive, gets your work done quickly, and charges fairly. You are likely to go back to him and even recommend him to your friends. This same relationship may be formed by the blacksmith and people he goes to for manufactured metals, and likewise between the manufacturers and the gatherers. This entire system encourages realistic business relationships and community. Being shady, scamming, trying to undercut someone, or being unreliable may backfire on you. A player can potentially play most of the game without ever leaving their node. They can set up a business, buy goods from manufacturers, and sell their services to customers. Now in Ashes of Creation, the players actually become a part of inhabiting the world. They are able to buy housing within their nodes, set up shops, and set their freeholds up to be farms, taverns, processing centers, and more. Now these freeholds will help to populate the world. If we have an average of 10,000 freeholds on a server, and each one is half an acre, you are looking at 20 square kilometers of freeholds alone. That is half the size of the entire map of Skyrim. On the wiki, it says that freeholds will be affected by adjacent terrain features. For example, building next to a river provides a nearby source of clean water and will have a positive effect on crops. Now this is older information and I haven't heard it referenced recently in any of the official content. But if this is true, I think we will get a very natural civilization feel to freehold placement. I believe you will see a larger grouping of freeholds located near major nodes based on convenience. Then you will have freeholds popping up near frequently used monster farming areas or heavily traveled crossroads. And finally, you will have freeholds focused on natural resources. These freeholds will be further from civilization and be focused on proximity to commonly used gathering areas and optimizing nearby terrain tiles for their production. To me, this feels like a real civilization, and will begin to naturally create communities as you run into the same people who live nearby or regularly frequent the areas you do. Now in Ashes of Creation, you have the corruption system to discourage griefing. However, I think the game is set up in a way that a far more powerful system will govern players who are toxic or grief excessively, and that is the community itself. It goes back to what we talked about with business relationships, and I think toxic people will find themselves excommunicated or blacklisted by certain communities. People are pretty good at governing themselves when you can't hide behind the mask of anonymity. With no server transfers or name changes available, you would have to reroll and lose all progress if you make too bad of a name for yourself. This leads into the next topic, which is politics. When systems are in place for realistic communities to form and there is a cost or risk for a reward to player actions, then the leadership and interactions between each community becomes increasingly important. If people in the leadership role are failing to look out for the best interests of their community, we will probably soon see a change in power. Now, I don't want to get too into the politics that I predict we will see in Ashes of Creation, as it is highly speculative and will probably vary from server to server, but I can entirely see larger guilds offering stability and harassment-free gameplay to smaller groups in return for their support in controlling territory. I think it is very likely that we will see a realistic progression on each server as society advances from a free-for-all early on with bandits and griefing to a more organized system of smaller communities and finally become civilized large alliances and nations. This could be drastically different for each server, however, as some servers will start with large predefined groups such as guilds or streamer communities. With all these systems interconnected to each other, I see Ashes of Creation becoming the closest thing we have ever seen to a real-life simulation within a fantasy setting. This also gives the game a huge amount of replayability, as each server will have its own history and progression. I can see down the line experienced players wanting to go back and play on an entirely fresh server just to see a new progression play out. I think the hype for this game, including my own, are because of these systems and how realistic they feel. I think the success of this game will mean a lot for the MMORPG industry, and will be doing whatever I can to help it succeed. I would also love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. I'm Bartik, see you on the next one.